Welcome to my messy studio, everyone. My name is Mark, and I'm an artist and an art professor. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to make your very own Fude Nib in just a few minutes using a few simple tools. For those of you unfamiliar with Fude Nibs, I have tons of videos introducing them and showing you how they work. But if you already know what a Fude is and what it's capable of, and are ready to learn how to make your very own, keep watching. Fude Nibs are one of the most versatile drawing tools out there, allowing an artist to create a huge range of line weights, as well as an intriguing variety of different strokes and textures. And the great thing is that they're usually pretty cheap and widely available. But what if you want to fit a Fude Nib into your favorite pen body? If that pen uses a standard number 5 or number 6 size nib, then you can buy any number of Chinese-made Fude Nibs that'll likely fit into it. However, if that pen is an unusual size, such as the number 4 size on this TWSBI Eco, then your only option would be to get one custom made by a nib grinding service. This I've done a number of times from a company called fpnibs.com, and while it's expensive, the Fude Nibs they make from high-quality steel Yovo nibs are really wonderful, and that they can be paired with a pen body of your choice makes it worth every penny. However, in the last few weeks, inspired by the detailed instruction of one of my channel members, I've learned how to make well-functioning Fude Nibs, and I'm pleased to report that not only is it a fairly easy process, but that these nibs have some interesting advantages over both the Fude Nibs you get out of the box and the ones made by nib meisters. Bold claim, I know, but I don't make it lightly. So, if you enjoy tinkering and are willing to risk ruining a nib or two during the learning process, I will now show you how to make a Fude Nib of your very own. Here are the supplies you're going to need. First, get yourself a few cheap extra fine nibs to start with, ones you're not going to be sad to ruin. I happen to have a number of cheap Chinese-made nibs lying around, but you can buy a pack of 5 Jinhao nibs very inexpensively. You're going to need 3 kinds of wet and dry sandpaper: 1000 grit for grinding, 2000 grit for refining, and a 12,000 grit micromesh for polishing. You're going to need a jewelry loop to get a good look at your handiwork, and something you can use as a shim. This could be made of brass, but even a sheet of mylar like this, or even a strip of acetate will do to remove potential burrs inside the tines. And lastly, and most importantly, you're going to need this tool called a parallel action plier. These are very important and why my previous Fude making efforts failed so miserably. Regular pliers, like these long nose pliers, apply uneven pressure to the tines when bending them, making them splay and misalign. Whereas these pliers apply even pressure, leaving the tines aligned after they're bent. This tool makes all the difference. Fude nibs can be made in a variety of lengths and angles, but I think that 45 degrees is optimal, and that the more length you get, the better. But there are 2 important considerations which determine length and angle. First is the amount of space inside the cap. This can be hard to tell in a cap that's opaque, and is why I prefer to use clear demonstrator pens for this purpose. 2 good candidates would be these 2 pens made by Asvine, the V200 and the P36, both having ample space inside the cap to accommodate a Fude nib with a large bend. However, this Asvine pen, the V126, has less space inside the cap, so I have to be careful how large to make the bend and make sure that the angle here doesn't go past 30 degrees. While this is a question of eyeballing and estimating, don't stress too much over it, since the bend can be adjusted afterwards to fit the cap. Just go very slowly when capping for the first time, and if you feel contact between the nib and the cap, you can adjust the angle of the nib. Fude nibs work at a variety of angles, so while 45 is probably ideal, a flatter angle will also work perfectly well. The second consideration is the length of the feed. On some pens, such as this narwhal demonstrator, the feed is set back quite a bit, so you can make the bent tip very long, as much as 4 millimeters. On other pens, the feed is much longer, such on this pen BBS 355. In such cases, should you want a longer Fude, the feed can be trimmed back without any effect on the performance. For the demonstration, I'll be using this Moonman Q1, a great candidate for having a Fude nib because of the ample space inside the cap. This pen already has a Fude nib in it, one made by Jinhao, but if everything goes as planned, the one we're making here from a quality number 6 Yovo nib will be much, much better. I'm going to put my reputation on the line here and work in real time with no editing, so you'll see no additional tricks are involved. The first step is to remove the tipping from both the top and bottom of the nib using 1000 grit sandpaper. It's a good idea to put the sandpaper on a block or to work against the edge of the table so that your nib is at the same angle as the paper, which is going to ensure that only the tip of the nib is removed and nothing else. So let's start removing the bottom tipping on the nib. You want to go slow and check your work often. So let's see. Okay, a little bit of the tipping is removed. We're going to need a little bit more. By the way, some people use 800 grit sandpaper, but I think 1000 grit sandpaper is a little bit safer. It allows you to work a little more gradually. There's less risk involved. Though I'm assuming that once you have a lot of practice, that 800 grit will get you there much, much faster. Okay, I think one more pass on the sandpaper will be sufficient. Let's use a fresh area. We can run our finger along the bottom to make sure that there's no tipping left. There's a little tiny bit left. So let's do a little bit more work. Okay, and the tipping is completely removed. Okay, now we're going to flip the nib upside down and remove the tipping on top. There's usually not as much tipping on top, and this is going to be a faster process. Again, check your work frequently. Okay, almost gone. By removing the tipping on the top and the bottom, it ensures you that you're able to hold the Fude completely flat against the paper. Now, it will result in a tip that's a little bit flat, a little bit stub-like, but because this nib is an extra fine, it's not going to make any difference at all. You'll barely be able to notice the stub-like quality of the line. Okay, let me run my finger across the top. Okay, the tipping on top is completely removed. The one on the bottom is completely gone, but you know what? Just in case, I'm going to run it one more time against the paper. I don't want to have any tipping on the bottom at all. Okay, now it's completely gone. Okay, the next step is to insert the nib into the pen. So let's take out the Fude nib, which is a little bit tightly fitted in there, but comes out. Okay, let's put my nib in. Okay, make sure it's all the way in, which is going to allow you to mark off exactly where you want to make the bend. Now, as mentioned, on some pens, the feed runs almost all the way up to the tip, in which case it can be clipped. I can clip this one too, so I can run it back, but the farther back you make the bend, the riskier it is, the greater the chance that you're going to deform the tines, have them splay. So don't make the bend too great. I would say no more than 4 millimeters at the extreme. So I'm going to mark it off right here with a fine tip marker. And then I can make the bend directly on the pen if I want, which actually is going to ensure that everything is parallel, because this is the absolutely most crucial element in the whole process, the bending. If it's in any way crooked, you're going to have problems. So I'm going to line up my parallel action pliers, and then I'm going to hold it up and make sure that the bend is going to be absolutely parallel. Hold it firmly, don't squeeze too much, and bend. You want about a 45-degree bend, but this can be adjusted later if it's too great or not great enough. So let's keep bending. Again, I'm trying to keep things as straight as possible. And let's see where we are. Okay, I think that's a pretty good bend. Now I'm going to take a look at the tines for some potential problems. The first is a separation of the tines at the tip. The way to fix that is to take one of the tines at a time, push down and cross it underneath the other one. So you're going to do this one first, down and across, and then do the other one down and across. Do this gently a few times, and then you'll find that the tines are going to align and make contact. Because right now, if there's even a little tiny bit of separation, ink will not flow directly down the ink channel, and the pen will not write. So I'm going to give this a gentle nudge down and push it across. Okay, let's do that again on the other side. I'm going to push the tine down, and across. Okay, we have contact. We have contact. Let's do it one more time. I still see a little bit of space. Down and across. And down and across. This, by the way, is the same procedure used when you want to tighten up the tines on your nib when you have too much ink flow. Okay, the tines are making contact, and now we have to look for the second potential problem, which is a misalignment of the tines. And for that, you're going to need your loop. So I'm going to have to take this off camera and take a look at the tipping underneath the loop. And what I notice is a little tiny bit of misalignment. Let's take a look. Okay, let me take the ink off the nib because I can't see it. Let's see what we have here. Okay, so one tine is ever so slightly lower than the other. The fix for that is very easy. So I'm going to push one tine down very gently, except now I'm pushing straight down. I'm not moving things across. So let's push it down. And let's do it one more time. I have to be gentle and go really slow. And then check your work once again. Under the loop, let's see what we have. Okay, I think we're very close to being aligned. I think we need one more nudge. By the way, always push the tines down, never up. This is the same process that you would use when tines are misaligned on a regular nib. So absolutely no difficulty there. Okay, I think we have aligned tines here. So let's see what we have. Okay, we have alignment. Okay, now that we have alignment, now it's time for the honing process, which is going to use 2000 grit sandpaper. So let's give this a shot. My pen is filled with ink, which gives me a little bit of lubrication. And I'm going to polish at every possible angle. So I'm going this way in circles, then I'm going to change the angle a little bit, hold the pen at slightly more vertical angle, and you can do figure eights. Be gentle. This is 2000 grit sandpaper. It's very fine, but you can still over sand. So I'm just barely making contact here. More vertical angle. And then if you want your pen to write in reverse, which by the way you do, flip it upside down and give it a few gentle figure eights upside down. Okay, so once again, let's go through another polishing process. Okay, now we're ready for the micro mesh. Let's polish it with a micro mesh. Again, go through the same process. So start as flat as possible. By the way, you can hold at slight angles side to side to make the nib a little bit rounder, to give the tipping a little bit less of a stub-like character. Again, it's not such a big deal. Right? Figure eights, you can write letters if you want, go different directions. Right? Just make sure you work at every different angle, the same way you'd be using a Fude Nib at different angles, and reverse writing as well. So let's go through this one more process one more time. Okay, this is pretty much ready to go. I think as a last step, and this is not always necessary, you can take your shim and run it gently through the tines. Let's see if I can get it to go through the tines to get rid of any potential burrs. I don't think I have any on mine though. I can't see any. Okay, let's give it a shot. So I've got Strathmore Bristol paper here. The pen is filled with Noodler's Lexington Gray ink. Let's give it a shot. So we're going to start off with a vertical. We're close to vertical. Very, very smooth. We have an extra fine line. Let's change the angle slightly. Okay, we're getting something approaching a medium. Let's change the angle slightly. We have a broad. Let's change the angle slightly. Double broad. We're getting there. Change the angle slightly, and we're getting something that's pretty wide. Now, here is what's happening and why the pen doesn't write any wider. The feed is getting in the way. So one thing I'd like to do is actually trim back the feed ever so slightly. So for that, I'm going to need an X-Acto knife, which I have right here. And what I'm going to do is just take a little notch off the top of the feed so that it doesn't get in the way of the Fude Nib when held at a really flat angle. Let's see. Hopefully I don't damage the nib as I do this. Again, my reputation's on the line. This is live, people. Okay. Not quite straight. I might have to sand this down a little bit later. Off camera. Okay. Now, let's give it a shot. So, once again, we have our vertical. By the way, we haven't tested reverse writing. Let's try reverse writing. Okay, reverse writing is really good, really smooth. Extra, extra fine line. So, we have a medium. We have broad. We have double broad, and now let's see if we can hold the nib very flat against the paper, and look at that line variation, people. This is, if I go slow, anyway, pretty wide, much wider than most Fude nibs can go. Now, unfortunately, these Moonman feeds have relatively dry ink flow. So, one thing I can do is adjust the ink flow a little bit by widening the ink channel. That's going to make the ink flow a little bit more generous and will make this better for the Fude. However, that's not something I'm going to do on camera. This is an operation that's best done off camera. I'll try that and see how that works later. But for right now, I think this Fude works really, really well and pairs incredibly well with this stubby Moonman Q1 because it allows me to hold it a bunch of different ways. So I can use my regular writer's grip to do the drawing, and also I can change to this kind of modified grip, which allows me to hold the pen comfortably at this very flat angle of attack. And let's compare it to the original Fude Nib that I had in it. Let me see if I can find it again. Let's see, where did it go? Here's the original Fude Nib from the Jinhao. Is this it? Yeah, okay. So, first of all, let's compare the lengths here. Look at the length of my Fude Nib versus the length of the original Jinhao. First of all, the angle here is steeper than necessary. It's more than 45 degrees. This one's less than 45 degrees, but still perfectly comfortable, particularly with this pen. And let's compare the performance. So let's take out this nib, if I can. It's been really difficult to take it out. Okay, I managed to take it out. Not so easy, right? Sometimes these nibs are very tightly fitted. Okay. So let's put in the original Jinhao. Let's get it going. Okay, so here is the line variation on the Jinhao nib. Fairly smooth, but you can see that because it has a little bit of tipping on it, it doesn't start nearly as fine as the nib that I made. It works fairly well. It's got decent control. One advantage of this nib is that the bend is slightly curved, whereas the bend in my nib is a little more abrupt. I'm assuming because this was done in some kind of specialized tool, as opposed to apparel action pliers like I did with mine. Okay, so a decent line variation here, but once you take the pen past a certain point, this is as wide as it's going to go. So far, besides doing this on a number of cheap Chinese nibs, I've made this lovely Fude nib for this Kaweco Lilliput. So we have an extra fine and really good control over line variation. This modification is actually a lot easier to do on smaller nibs. So even though these Kaweco nibs are a little bit more expensive, they're actually a less riskier option to modify than a number 6 Yovo nib. And I've also done this modification on this Bach nib, which I've placed into this Asvine V200, and this pen has huge line variation and really good ink flow, which makes this pen very, very fun to draw with. Let me open up the back. And when you hold it really flat against the paper, watch it go. Really fun for sketching. I hope you found this tutorial useful, and if you did, please consider subscribing or even becoming a channel member. And if you ruined your nib permanently in the process of making a Fude nib, please let me know and I'll send you a refund. Just kidding, you assume all of the risk. Thanks so much for watching, and see you back in my messy studio very soon. Bye for now.